3 days after I placed that sealed envelope on the conference table and walked out, they would open it, and when they did, their laughter would die in their throats. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Penny Wright, though around Midwest Manufacturing they called me Precision Penny. Not as a compliment, mind you, but as a joke. Because I cared about the numbers. Because I double-checked everything. Because I actually gave a damn about getting things right. 7 years I'd given them. 7 years of unpaid overtime, of brilliant innovations credited to the company, of watching mediocre men climb ladders I'd built with my own 2 hands. The conference room smelled like stale coffee and expensive cologne that morning. I'd spent 3 weeks preparing for this meeting, triple-checking every number, every projection, every piece of evidence. My presentation folder was 2 inches thick, bursting with data that couldn't be argued with. The new calibration device I developed had cut costs by 50% and increased efficiency by 37%. I had the spreadsheets, I had the before and after metrics. I had photographs of my original sketches with my handwriting, time-stamped emails, everything. I stood at the head of the table, looking at the 3 people who held my future in their hands. Victor Chen, VP of Operations, sat with his arms crossed, that perpetual smirk playing at his lips. Diane Morrison, CFO, was already looking at her phone. Ben Walker, VP of Business Development, was leaning back in his chair like he was watching a mildly entertaining television show. I began my presentation, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. I walked them through the development process, the testing phases, the implementation results. Every slide was a masterpiece of clarity. Every number told a story of innovation and dedication. When I reached the final slide, I took a breath and made my request. A 30% salary increase. Not pulled from thin air, but carefully researched against industry standards for engineers with my level of contribution. And a title, Lead Innovation Engineer. Something that actually reflected what I'd been doing for 7 years. Victor didn't even let me finish. He cut me off mid-sentence, that smirk transforming into something uglier. A raise, Penny? His voice dripped with condescension. You should be grateful we kept you on after some of your crazy ideas. This device could just be a lucky accident. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my face neutral. I'd expected resistance, but not outright dismissal. Diane looked up from her phone, rolling her eyes in a gesture so theatrically dismissive it would have been comical if it wasn't devastating. Overly ambitious, she said, waving her hand as if shooing away a fly. The market is tough right now. And honestly, what you do, it's just the work of a regular technician. She emphasized the word technician like it was an insult, her tone making it clear exactly how little she thought of my contributions. Then Ben started laughing. Actually laughing. Look, Penny, I'll give you this. You're good at what you do. But this company is a machine, not a stage for a solo star. Every success here is a team effort. He put heavy, mocking emphasis on the last 2 words, making it abundantly clear what he thought of my request. My hands were shaking as I lifted the thick folder of documentation and placed it on the table. 7 years of proof, thousands of hours of work, market analysis, contribution records. Original designs with my signature. Numbers don't lie, I said, my voice quieter than I'd intended. My numbers have brought in millions of dollars, and I believe in the truth. Victor didn't even glance at the folder. He just pushed it back toward me with one sharp motion, hard enough that several pages spilled onto the floor. They scattered across the polished wood like fallen leaves. The truth is, you're not as valuable as you think you are. Don't get cocky. The room erupted in laughter, not polite chuckles, but genuine, belly-shaking laughter at my expense. I felt something crack inside my chest, something that had been bending for 7 years finally snapping clean through. I stood up slowly. My hands had stopped shaking. Everything had become very clear, very simple. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick white envelope, sealed with my own wax seal. I placed it carefully in the center of the table. Thank you for your time, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, cold and distant, like it was coming from someone else entirely. Then I turned and walked out. Behind me, the laughter continued, waves of it rolling over me as I made my way to the door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. That sound, that casual cruelty, would fuel everything that came next. 3 days, I thought as I walked to my car. In 3 days, they'd open that envelope and find my meticulously documented resignation letter. And by then, their phones would be ringing, and I wouldn't be answering. The parking lot was nearly empty at that early hour. I sat in my car for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, breathing slowly. 7 years. I'd given them 7 years of my life, my creativity, my passion, and they'd treated it like a joke, treated me like a joke. But I wasn't laughing. The next morning, I walked into the office as if nothing had happened. The sealed envelope sat on that conference table, untouched. No one had opened it yet. Good. I needed these 3 days to make sure everything was in order. Jamie found me during lunch break. Sweet, nervous Jamie, who'd been my friend since my first week at Midwest. They pulled me into an empty break room, their face tight with worry. "Penny, you can't leave," Jamie whispered, glancing at the door like someone might overhear. I heard Victor and Diane talking. "They're planning to dig into your past, find any mistake you've ever made. They're talking about suing you for breach of contract if you try to work for a competitor. They'll destroy your reputation." I looked at my friend's worried face and felt a surge of affection. Jamie was genuinely concerned, genuinely afraid for me. "Thank you for telling me," I said calmly. "I appreciate it more than you know." That afternoon, an email appeared in my inbox. From Victor, of course. The subject line read, "Regarding your future." The message was brief and threatening. "Your departure would be career suicide. Don't even think about taking our ideas to a competitor. The consequences will be severe. I've already spoken with our legal team about protecting our intellectual property. You'd do well to remember that your innovations belong to Midwest Manufacturing, not to you." I read it twice. Then I deleted it without responding. Victor didn't know it yet, but he'd just made a critical error. That email, with its thinly veiled threats and its claim on innovations that were entirely mine, would be useful later, because Victor, Diane, and Ben didn't know something crucial about me. They didn't know that for 7 years, I'd been documenting everything, every email, every meeting minute, every sketch and design and breakthrough. Every piece of evidence that proved what was mine, what I'd created, what I'd contributed, it was all stored on an encrypted cloud server that only I could access. They thought I was just Precision Penny, the joke, the technician who cared too much about getting things right. They had no idea what precision really meant. It meant being thorough. It meant being prepared. It meant never, ever leaving yourself vulnerable. I'd already written my resignation letter weeks ago, as soon as I'd gotten the other offer, the offer they knew nothing about. The one that would change everything. On the third morning, I arrived early. The office was quiet, just the hum of computers and the distant sound of the cleaning crew finishing up. I walked straight to the executive conference room, where the leadership team held their morning meeting. Victor, Diane, and Ben were already there, along with a few other executives. They looked up in surprise when I entered. I didn't give them time to speak. I simply walked to the head of the table and placed a new sealed envelope on the polished wood. This one was thicker than the first, official-looking, with my name and the company address in formal calligraphy. I met each of their eyes in turn. Victor's smirk, Diane's irritation, Ben's confusion. I committed those expressions to memory. Then I spoke. "Thank you for your time." 5 words. The same 5 words I'd said 3 days ago. My voice was steady, professional, completely devoid of emotion. Then I turned and walked out of that room for the last time. I didn't hear the laughter this time. Behind me, there was only silence. The Industrial Certification Authority occupied a gleaming glass building in downtown Chicago, a far cry from Midwest's aging facility in the suburbs. I'd been in contact with them for 3 months, ever since Olivia Chen, their director, had approached me at an industry conference. "We've been following your work, Penny," she'd said over coffee. "We need someone with your vision, your attention to detail, your integrity. How would you feel about shaping the standards for the entire industry?" Chief Innovation Officer. The title alone made me dizzy, but it wasn't about the title. It was about the authority. The Industrial Certification Authority was the organization that set the standards every manufacturing company in the sector had to follow to operate. Without ICA certification, you couldn't bid on contracts, couldn't claim compliance, couldn't survive in the industry, including Midwest Manufacturing. My first day at ICA, Olivia welcomed me with genuine warmth. "We've been waiting for someone like you," she said, walking me through the bright, modern offices. "Your first project is to modernize our calibration and precision standards. They haven't been significantly updated in 15 years, and frankly, they're not keeping pace with technology or best practices." I spent my first week reviewing the existing standards. They were riddled with loopholes, outdated measurements, and vague language that allowed companies to cut corners while still claiming compliance. Companies like Midwest, who'd built their profit margins on exploiting those loopholes. 2 weeks into my new position, my phone started ringing. Jamie's voice was panicked. "Penny, what did you do? The new standards we can't meet them. The Eastbrook contract renewal is coming up, and if we can't get recertified," they broke off, and I could hear the chaos in the background of the call. I kept my voice professional, the polished tone of an ICA official. "ICA offers consulting services for implementation of new standards. I can transfer your call to that department." "Penny, please, you know what this will do to us, to the people who work here. Is this about what happened in that meeting?" My jaw tightened. This is about raising industry standards to where they should have been all along. Companies that have been cutting corners will struggle. Companies that have been doing things right will be fine. The next call was from Victor himself. "Penny," his voice was sharp with barely controlled rage, "this is a joke, right? You're using your new position to get revenge on us? This is abuse of power. This is personal vendetta disguised as policy." I pulled my phone away from my ear slightly, tapped the speaker button, and spoke clearly. This call is being recorded per ICA policy. Would you like to repeat that accusation for the record, Mr. Chen? The line went dead. The new standards I developed with my team at ICA were comprehensive and unforgiving. We focused on continuous precision measurement and strict periodic calibration drift controls. Companies could no longer skate by with annual certifications and spotty record keeping. The standards required real-time monitoring, transparent documentation, and regular third-party audits. During the final approval meeting, Xavier Ruiz, ICA's technical director, expressed concern. These changes are significant, Penny. A lot of manufacturers won't be ready for this. We're going to face serious pushback. I met his eyes steadily. Companies that have been operating with integrity will adapt quickly. Those that have been exploiting loopholes will struggle. We cannot lower standards to accommodate weakness or dishonesty. The standards passed with unanimous approval. Within 48 hours of the announcement, Midwest Manufacturing failed their recertification audit. They were downgraded to provisional certification, a designation that required them to publicly disclose their status to all clients and undergo monthly audits until they could demonstrate sustained compliance. Their stock price dropped 11% in a single day. I watched the market reports that evening from my new apartment, a clean, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. 7 years in a cramped studio, scraping by on a salary that hadn't kept pace with inflation. 7 years of being told I should be grateful for the opportunity. 7 years of watching my innovations make other people wealthy while I struggled to pay rent. Not anymore. The formal complaint arrived 3 weeks later. Midwest Manufacturing, represented by a team of expensive attorneys, filed a grievance with ICA's Ethics Board and the Industrial Oversight Council. The accusations were serious: abuse of position, use of proprietary information, deliberate manipulation of standards to harm a specific company. I read through the 50-page document in my office, my coffee growing cold as I absorbed every detail. They'd done their homework, or thought they had. They documented every email I'd sent at Midwest, every project I'd worked on, every piece of information I might have had access to. They were painting a picture of a disgruntled former employee who'd engineered an elaborate revenge scheme. What they didn't know was that I'd been more careful than they could possibly imagine. The industry conference in Detroit was unavoidable. As ICA's Chief Innovation Officer, I was the keynote speaker. I knew Midwest would send representatives. What I didn't expect was for Diane and Ben to corner me in the hallway outside the main ballroom. Diane looked different, older. The confident superiority had been replaced by something desperate. "Penny, please, we need to talk." "We made mistakes," Ben added quickly. "We see that now. Come back to Midwest. We'll make you director of technology. Whatever salary you want. We'll give you everything you asked for." I looked at them calmly. Everything I asked for 3 months ago? When I'd earned it? When I deserved it? "Hundreds of people are going to lose their jobs," Diane said, her voice cracking. "The Eastbrook contract is worth $40 million. If we lose it because we can't get recertified, then perhaps you should focus on meeting the standards rather than asking me to lower them," I said. "The decisions that led to this situation were yours, not mine. I'm creating a better industry. What happens to companies that can't or won't adapt is not my responsibility." "Penny." Victor's voice came from behind me. I turned slowly. He looked worse than the other two. His expensive suit hung differently, like he'd lost weight. There were shadows under his eyes. "I'm begging you," he said, and the words seemed to cost him everything. "Give us a chance. One chance to make this right." I looked into his eyes, remembering that smirk, that casual cruelty, the way he'd pushed my life's work onto the floor like it was garbage. "I gave you 7 years of chances," I said quietly. "This isn't about money or titles anymore. It's about truth and justice." I walked away and didn't look back. The ethics hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. ICA's main conference room had been converted into something resembling a courtroom, with a long table for the review board, seats for the complainants and respondents, and a gallery for observers. I'd recused myself from any direct involvement in the case, as was proper, but I had the right to observe, to see my name defended or dragged through the mud. I sat in the gallery, watching through the floor-to-ceiling windows as Victor and his legal team set up their presentation materials. He looked confident again. Whatever momentary weakness he'd shown at the conference had been locked away. This was the Victor I remembered, all sharp edges and calculated aggression. The board called the session to order. Victor stood and began his presentation. He was good, I had to admit. He painted a picture of a vindictive employee who'd stolen proprietary information and used it to craft standards specifically designed to harm her former employer. He produced emails, internal documents, and testimony from Midwest employees. Then he played his trump card. "Members of the board," Victor said, his voice ringing with righteous anger. "Penny Wright deliberately destroyed and withheld critical calibration documentation before leaving Midwest Manufacturing. She knew this would cripple our ability to maintain compliance. She sabotaged us, and then used her new position to ensure we'd fail under standards she knew we couldn't meet. I felt a smile tug at my lips. I'd been waiting for this. The board members exchanged glances. The chairwoman, Dr. Sarah Martinez, leaned forward. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Chen. Do you have evidence? Victor's lawyer stood up, holding a folder. We have testimony from multiple employees who confirm that critical files went missing from our systems in the week before Miss Wright's departure. We have... One moment. ICA's chief legal counsel, Marcus Webb, rose from his seat. He was a tall man with steel-gray hair and the kind of calm authority that came from decades of experience. With the board's permission, I'd like to present some findings from our preliminary investigation. Dr. Martinez nodded. Marcus walked to the front of the room and connected his laptop to the projection system. A detailed chart appeared on the screen, showing documentation flow and retention rates. During our investigation, Marcus began, we found that Miss Wright not only completed her documentation handoff, but exceeded industry standards by 340% in both quantity and quality of transferred materials. The screen changed to show photographs of meticulously organized file systems, each folder clearly labeled with dates and contents. I recognized my own organizational system, the one I'd spent years perfecting. What's more interesting, Marcus continued, is what happened after Miss Wright's departure. Several critical documents in Midwest Manufacturing's internal systems were mysteriously moved, misfiled, or deleted. However, complete backup copies of all these documents exist in ICA's records, provided by Miss Wright when she joined our organization. A new image appeared on screen, a scanned letter, dated to my first day at ICA. This is a voluntary disclosure Miss Wright filed with our records department. In it, she provided complete copies of all calibration documentation from her previous employer, with a sworn statement that this was to ensure total transparency in her new role and to prevent any possible conflicts of interest. I watched Victor's face on the screen. The confidence drained out of it like water from a broken glass. He turned to his lawyers, frantically whispering. One of them was flipping through files, clearly looking for something they should have found earlier. Marcus wasn't finished. The truly fascinating part is the timeline. The documents that allegedly went missing from Midwest Systems were deleted or moved 3 weeks after Miss Wright's departure. We have the server logs, we have the IP addresses. And none of them trace back to Miss Wright, or anyone acting on her behalf. Dr. Martinez's expression had gone from neutral to severe. Mr. Chen, are you suggesting that someone at Midwest Manufacturing deliberately sabotaged your own documentation systems? Victor's face had gone pale. That's not, I need to consult with. We have one more piece of evidence, Marcus said. He clicked to another slide. This one showed an email chain, with certain passages highlighted. This is internal correspondence from Midwest Manufacturing's executive team, dated 2 weeks before Miss Wright's resignation. In it, there's discussion of her potential departure and strategies to prevent her from sharing her innovations with competitors. The highlighted section made several board members lean forward. It included phrases like, our proprietary methods, and legally enforced non-compete, and, most damningly, her designs belong to the company. The problem, Marcus said softly, is that Miss Wright never signed a non-compete agreement. She never signed over intellectual property rights. In fact, according to her employment contract, which we verified with the original documents, she retained all rights to her personal innovations. Midwest Manufacturing had the right to use her innovations under the terms of her employment, but never owned them. The room was absolutely silent. Miss Wright's innovations were her own, Marcus concluded. Her documentation was complete and professional. Her conduct has been beyond reproach. This complaint appears to be an attempt to blame Miss Wright for Midwest Manufacturing's own internal failures and to distract from their inability to meet updated industry standards that apply equally to all companies in the sector. Dr. Martinez looked at Victor with an expression of cold fury. Mr. Chen, this board takes false accusations very seriously. We will be opening a separate investigation into Midwest Manufacturing's documentation practices, internal controls, and whether your leadership team engaged in deliberate fraud against shareholders by misrepresenting your compliance capabilities. Victor's lawyer tried to object, but Dr. Martinez cut him off with a gesture. This hearing is concluded. The complaint against Miss Wright is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, the board will be recommending sanctions against Midwest Manufacturing for bringing frivolous accusations and wasting this body's time and resources. I stood up and walked out of the hearing room. Behind me, I could hear Victor's voice rising in desperate protest, but it didn't matter anymore. The truth had spoken, and it had spoken clearly. 4 months later, Midwest Manufacturing's board of directors announced major leadership changes. Victor Chen, Diane Morrison, and Ben Walker were all terminated for cause. The Securities and Exchange Commission had opened an investigation into their practices, and criminal charges for securities fraud and shareholder deception were being considered. The stock price had fallen by 80%. The Eastbrook contract had been canceled. The company was in the process of being acquired by a competitor for parts. I didn't celebrate. There was no joy in watching a company collapse, in knowing that good people who'd worked there, people like Jamie, were scrambling to find new jobs. But I also knew that the company's failure wasn't my fault. It was the inevitable result of years of corner cutting, of prioritizing short-term profits over sustainable practices, of leadership that valued ego over excellence. The new owner, a company called Precision Industries, reached out to me through back channels. They wanted to know if I'd consult on the restructuring. They wanted to do things right this time. I agreed, on one condition. 6 months after that disastrous meeting where Victor had pushed my life's work onto the floor, I stood once again at the front of a conference room. But this was different. This room was in ICA's headquarters, and it was packed with industry leaders, journalists, and policymakers. I was there to announce the Innovation Attribution Framework, a new ICA initiative that would fundamentally change how companies handled intellectual property and innovation credit. For too long, I began, my voice steady and clear, companies have been able to claim credit for individual innovations without properly acknowledging the people who created them. This creates a system where brilliant minds are exploited, where innovation is stifled, where the people doing the actual work have no leverage and no recognition. I clicked to the next slide, showing the framework's core principles. The Innovation Attribution Framework requires companies to maintain transparent records of who contributes to innovations. These records must be accessible to employees, to shareholders, and to regulatory bodies. Companies that fail to properly attribute innovation will face certification consequences. There was murmuring in the audience. I'd expected resistance. What I didn't expect was to see Victor Chen sitting in the back row. He looked different again. Not just older, but diminished. He wasn't with Midwest anymore. He wasn't a vice president of anything. He was just another person in the audience, one whose fall from grace had been spectacular and public. Someone raised their hand. It was Luis Martinez, a journalist I'd met at several conferences. He'd always been friendly, but tough. Miss. Right. Critics might say this framework benefits individuals at the expense of companies. How do you respond to concerns that this could hurt business innovation and profitability? I met his eyes, then let my gaze sweep across the room, deliberately landing on Victor for just a moment. Innovation without attribution is theft, I said clearly. Companies that understand this will attract the best talent, create the best products, and ultimately provide the best returns for their investors. I paused, then looked directly at Victor. This isn't about individuals versus corporations. It's about creating an ecosystem where excellence is recognized, rewarded, and therefore multiplied. Companies that embrace this will thrive. Those that don't will find themselves unable to compete for talent in an industry where the best and brightest now have real choices. The room erupted in applause. Not everyone was clapping, I noticed. Some of the older executives looked troubled, but the younger people in the room, the engineers and researchers and innovators, they were standing up. Victor sat motionless in his seat, staring at his hands. I watched as he slowly stood up and made his way to the exit, his shoulders hunched, his whole body radiating defeat. He'd lost everything. His position, his reputation, his sense of superiority. And he'd lost it not because I'd attacked him, but because I'd simply stopped accepting less than I deserved. After the presentation, Olivia found me in the hallway. "That was masterful," she said. "You just changed the entire industry." I shook my head. The industry was already changing. I just helped push it in the right direction. Midwest Manufacturing's new leadership has agreed to be the first company to fully implement the framework. Olivia continued. They've identified 26 engineers whose innovations need proper attribution. Your name is at the top of the list, with 17 major innovations credited to you. 17. 7 years of work, finally acknowledged. I felt something in my chest, a knot I hadn't known was there, finally beginning to loosen. That evening, I stood in my apartment, looking out at the city lights. My phone buzzed with messages. Congratulations from colleagues, interview requests from journalists, and one message from Jamie. "I got a new job," they wrote, "with Precision Industries. Better pay, better conditions, and they actually care about what we think. Thank you, Penny. You didn't just save yourself, you saved a lot of us." I smiled and set my phone down. 7 years ago, I'd walked into Midwest Manufacturing fresh out of graduate school, full of passion and ideas and naive faith that hard work would be rewarded. 7 years of being diminished, dismissed, and disrespected had nearly broken that faith entirely. But standing here now, in this moment, I realized something important. The revenge hadn't been in watching Victor fall, or in seeing Midwest struggle. The revenge had been in refusing to accept their valuation of me, in walking away when they wouldn't recognize my worth. In building something better, something that would outlast all of us. I'd spent 7 years being Precision Penny, the joke, the technician who cared too much. Now I was Penny Wright, Chief Innovation Officer, the woman who'd reshaped an industry. But more than that, I was someone who'd learned that the most powerful form of revenge isn't destruction. It's refusing to be diminished. It's building something so undeniably excellent that the people who dismissed you have no choice but to watch your success from the sidelines. The sealed envelope I'd placed on that conference table 6 months ago had contained a simple resignation letter. Professional, brief, giving the standard 2 weeks' notice. There was no anger in it, no accusations, no threats. Just a clear statement that I was moving on to pursue other opportunities. They'd laughed when I walked out. They'd thought I was running away, that I was bitter and defeated. They hadn't understood that I wasn't running from anything. I was running toward everything I deserved. 3 days after I left that envelope on the table, they'd opened it. And their phones had started ringing, not with calls from me, begging to come back, but with calls from clients asking about the provisional certification status. With calls from investors concerned about the stock price. With calls from auditors wanting to review their documentation systems. I never answered when they called me, because I didn't need to. The numbers spoke for themselves. The truth spoke for itself. And finally, after 7 long years, my work spoke for itself too. Standing at my window, looking out at a city that had always seemed just out of reach, I raised my glass in a silent toast, not to revenge, but to something better, to justice, to truth. To the radical act of knowing your own worth and refusing to accept anything less. Somewhere out there, Victor was probably still trying to understand what had happened. How the joke, the technician, the woman he'd dismissed with a sneer, had systematically dismantled everything he'd built, not through anger or sabotage, but through excellence, through precision, through being exactly as good as I'd always known I was. That was the real revenge. Not destruction, but transformation. Not tearing them down, but building myself up so high that their opinion of me became irrelevant. I smiled and took another sip of wine. Tomorrow, there would be more work to do. More standards to improve, more innovations to develop, more ways to make the industry better for everyone who'd ever been dismissed or diminished or told they should be grateful for scraps. But tonight, I allowed myself this moment, this quiet victory, this proof that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply refusing to accept less than you deserve and watching everything else fall into place. Precision, Penny. They'd meant it as an insult, but precision was exactly what had saved me. Precision in documentation, precision in planning, precision in knowing my worth down to the last decimal point. And precision, I'd learned, was the most powerful weapon of all.